Hear me okay? Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for getting up and braving this early morning. I was worried it was going to be an empty room because of all the parties last night and get-together, so I appreciate so much seeing all of you here. Got the most essential items here. Got coffee, got a clicker, and I got a little presentation, so we'll try and go over that. So in case you didn't read the label over there, we're going to talk about the first 30 years of Warcraft. And what I hope what you get out of this is we want to share some of the experiences that we've had over 30 years, a little bit of the decisions that we made along the way, some of the lessons we learned, and I'm hopeful. I hope that there will be information that'll be helpful for all of you. So why don't we kick it off with a movie?
Go buy World of Warcraft, install it on your computer, and join the online sensation before we all murder you.
All right then.
Welcome to the World of Warcraft.
I'm William Shatner, and I'm a shaman.
I'm Mr. T, and this is my night elf mohawk.
T, there's no such thing as a night elf mohawk.
Shut up, fool!
This role-playing game where heroes like Leroy Jenkins do battle.
Leroy
That would be the World of Warcraft.
You're a player in the NFL, but what you're most proud of is that you've rated third nationally in dungeon progression.
Timing was perfect. That was fire.
For the Alliance!
For Azeroth!
Ready to work.
So just as Warcraft is celebrating 30 years, it's been about 30 years for me as well. I'll tell you a little bit of my background. I didn't start originally on Warcraft, although I did start playing back with Warcraft the RTS, and then I played in the beta for World of Warcraft. And I've been with Blizzard 12 years now. I started out first on Mists of Pandaria as a lead producer, and then spent a little bit of time over on Diablo 3. I brought it over to console, and then did Reaper of Souls. Killed the auction house. Sorry about that for all of you that had investments in that. But hopefully the rest of you were happy. And then back to the WoW team. Over the course of my history, which kind of portray it there, I worked on quite a few games, as you can see, either as executive producer, production director, and even game director. It's really kind of special and cool for me to be here at GDC because a couple of those games really happened because of the meetings and people that I met here at GDC. I was walking these halls when I first ran into a guy named Mike Booth with a little game called Nox. We made that together. Mike went on to do great things, including Left 4 Dead, which I'm sure you've heard of. At least I hope you have. Also at the IGF, I was looking at a lot of student projects and became enamored with one called Cloud. And that led me to meet Genova Chen and Kelly Santiago, and we started that game company. I incubated that when I was at Sony. So for all of you that are out there with your hopes and dreams and your game that you want to do, I encourage you to network, meet people. I think this is a great place to do it. In addition to the games that I've worked on, my educational background, I have a degree in computer science from the University of New Mexico. Probably not any Lobos out there, but if you're out there, put your hands up. Okay, I knew that. And then later in my career, I went back and got my MBA, and that was at USC Marshall School of Business. Wrote a book on project management and ended up teaching out of that book at the Interactive Media Division of Cinematic School at USC. Some of the students I worked with have gone on to do some pretty cool games. So it's been a great experience for me there. I've also was on the board for the AIS, so that's DICE. I think that kind of sums up me. Why don't we get on to the stuff we really want to talk about, which is Warcraft. So Warcraft, the universe, our mission is to build a fantasy universe that delights and connects everyone, everywhere. And so, we chose our words carefully. I mean, for us, that fantasy universe means, I can't even read my own notes here. It means that we essentially want to tell deep and cool stories. We want to be engaging. And in delighting, it's important to us that the game not only be a little dangerous, there has to be challenges, but there's an element of humor, and that distinguishes us from a lot of other games out there. Connecting is important for us, as we found, and I'll talk about through the journey of building Warcraft. It's that building a community, bringing people together, people that you might not have otherwise met in real life, you'll meet in our games. And we want to make sure that the games themselves, the content, and the communities that we foster are inclusive, that you can be who you want to be, and multicultural. And then the last part, we want to be everywhere. And if you'll notice, there's elements of mythology from across the globe, but we operate in 24/7 across the entire planet in many, many languages and cultures. And we think it's a cool way to kind of get in touch with other communities, other cultures. And we pride ourselves in trying to make our games feel like they were actually made for the regions or the countries that we publish in. Like even when we do localization, we'll take the little jokes that we tell that, if you're playing here in North America, you'll probably understand them. But if we did a literal translation of them to, other countries, Germany or, Peru, it wouldn't make as much sense. So our localization teams actually try to still have an element of humor, but a joke that makes sense in their culture. So these are essentially the games that we have released, including the WoW expansions, over our 30-year history for Warcraft. Warcraft itself is celebrating its 30 years coming this November. World of Warcraft is celebrating 20 years in operation. And again, this is in November. Hearthstone is celebrating its 10-year anniversary. And Rumble, our newest baby, is going to be 1 year old in November. So I'm going to walk through some of the pivotal milestones that we've had through the creation of these games, and then later, kind of connect that all together and talk about how we feel that this led to some of our successes. And then also want to share with you a big mistake that we made. So Warcraft, the RTS, started in 1994. We were playing a lot of real-time strategy games. The genre was just starting to happen. Up until that point, a lot of people were playing turn-based games. A lot of them were adaptations of board games. And so this notion of having real-time strategy games where you click on units, they go do the thing, and you're not pressing a turn button was still relatively novel. We love the genre. We wanted to be able to make a game in that genre. So we actually chose the fantasy setting for it because at that time, most of the RTS games were actually sci-fi or military in nature. And that turned out to be a pretty important distinction for us down the road. It's also important that in an RTS game, there's a very clear conflict. And so we thought, okay, in a fantasy setting, it's got to be orcs versus humans. There's a lot of literature that has established that long-standing rivalry, and in our case, competition for resources. So we thought that would be a very simple concept to start with. And there it is in all of its glory. For those of you that played Warcraft like I did, that's what it looked like when it first came out. If you look at the play screen down below, the little green blobs are the orcs. They're busily harvesting things, chopping down wood, what have you, building their village. But along comes the little blue blob. Well, that represents the humans. And of course, they're intruding on their territory, and thus the conflict begins. The early Warcraft game, you could play solo in campaigns, but you could also play with friends. I remember it wasn't quite as convenient as it is today, but I remember hooking up my computer over LAN with my neighbor and introducing everybody in my neighborhood to Warcraft. The storytelling was in the form of mission briefings, which you see in that upper corner, and it was voiceover, but it was this scrolling text. So we had a lot of success with Warcraft, did a sequel to it, and could have kind of just stayed there, but a lot of cool stuff was happening in the industry, not the least of which was 3D cards. When this came out, people didn't really have 3D cards on their computers. So in the late 90s, mid 90s, that's when they really started to become more prevalent, and we did Warcraft 3. One of the first big events of it was going full 3D with it. So now the camera could come down a little bit. You'd see a little bit of the shadows and volume of your units, a little more detail, higher resolution. The action was cooler. We also wanted to tell more story. So up until this point, it's missions, right? Go do this, go harvest that, go take down this human settlement. But we wanted to tell a deeper story that helped you feel more connected to what was going on in the game itself. And that led to creating these, what Blizzard would later become pretty famous for, is our pre-rendered cinematics. We use those for the announcement of games. Sorry, I'm going to go over here because I can't see some of you there. Thank you for coming in and sitting up front. I appreciate it. But we use that for the announcement of our games. We use that in between missions to kind of propel the story along. And to give it another connection, we added heroes to Warcraft 3. That was kind of an important decision because now you have these key story characters that we could tie everything to. It was a lot of what they were trying to accomplish, and you as the general above were ordering the troops around to help them, essentially. But one of the really smart things we did, because, I forgot to mention, we also had much deeper gameplay on this. We now had 12 different factions that could play in these maps, which, by the way, I got an interesting story from Chris Metzen, who was at that time, one of the story writers. We had all these different colors, 12 different colors for all the units, right? And you literally went on a menu and you picked pink or blue or yellow, and he thought, man, this is boring as heck. So he took each of those colors and he turned them into the various factions, which would later be the regions of Azeroth. So you can thank him for the fact that Twilight's Hammer is called that instead of pink. So. But anyway, the other thing that we did is as multiplayer caught on, and we could see, this is pretty cool. There's a real multiplayer community. We thought, how do we extend this? So we created a very robust mod system for the game. And that allowed our players to not only build maps to extend the game, but also games within the game. And what you're looking at there is a game, or a mod, and a very popular one for Warcraft 3 called Defense of the Ancients, or Dota. So this mod actually gave rise to the whole MOBA genre, and also tower defense. So it was really powerful. It allowed an extension of the game. Warcraft 3 was, by all accounts, one of the most popular RTSs of the time. So where do we go next with this? Do we continue to build this? Do we continue to extend this? Well, we're really excited about 3D and what could be done with it. I mean, when we're building RTS, you have this God's eye view of the map, watching the soldiers below. But what if you could be one of them? What if instead of from above, the game is built in such a way that you're part of that universe? And we loved MMOs at the time. We were playing them, and we're like, hey, we've seen by creating a platform in the game that we can have multiple games inside essentially the same universe. But MMOs would give us the opportunity to really immerse players. It's like cyberspace is here. And it was exciting for us to feel like, hey, we could be part of this. This could be the future. And we could have a lot of different gameplay inside of our game by taking Warcraft to an MMO. So how does Warcraft become an MMO? Initially, MMOs based on role-playing games, you typically level up to max level, you finish the story campaign, and you're kind of done. But the interesting and cool thing about MMOs is that you can extend that by having a lot of multiplayer interaction. And so for us, it was coming up with cool things for people to do together, so that you level up to max, but then you go on and do raids and dungeons, and a lot of activity together. And essentially, you forge connections with people that you would otherwise have never met. And that was something really powerful about World of Warcraft. So how did that change us? How did that change, in some ways, the industry? So when we released World of Warcraft, the internet was really just kind of happening for a lot of people. They were doing AOL chat rooms up until that point, text-based MUDs. So this was an opportunity for them to literally go into a world, be completely immersed in it, have a 3D avatar in a 360-degree world, and interact with people. They went out and harvested things. They quested together. They conquered demons and bosses together. They tanked. They healed. They cried. They hugged each other. They fell off of cliffs, but they were connecting with each other. And we became, the WoW became a lifestyle for many people. I mean, some of you already, and I appreciate you've come up to me and told me the stories about how WoW brought you together, made you friends. And it was a really powerful thing for us as a company, and it absolutely changed us. The very first BlizzCon that we had was for Burning Crusade. It was the first expansion that we had for World of Warcraft. And I was talking to one of the original developers the other night, and I said, tell me about those experiences. And he said, what was really interesting for us is that when we went to BlizzCon, we didn't know if it was going to be a success or not. But thousands of people were descending on the Anaheim Convention Center, and it blew them away. And the developers were like staring and looking at each other. It's like, oh my gosh, all these people here for us? But what they quickly realized is all those people were there for each other. And we went from being a game developer to being the caretakers of a community. I mean, it was a dawning realization to us that we no longer owned this game exclusively. All of you, some of you, that played it, we're that community. It's your game. And now we had to take great care in how we were the stewards of your world, your lifestyle. So this recounts some of the expansions that we've released over time for World of Warcraft. We have one coming up as well. Really excellent run for WoW. We hope to have it even longer, hopefully another 20 years at least. But one thing that was happening was about midway through the release of these expansions is our players were talking about, really want to be able to recreate that experience that they first had when they first joined WoW, that sense of discovery, that sense of playing together again. Because many of the things that we had done to make WoW more convenient to play, and many of these things were asked for by our player community, had actually, in the minds of some, especially some of the old-timers like me, had weakened some of those social bonds, that making the game a little bit more difficult, a little more dangerous, a little bit harder to actually, which seems counterintuitive, making it a little bit harder to actually get to meet people, made it easier to make it stick. And so, largely at the urging of our fans, we re-released this. We took an evolutionary step backward.
Someone once said that you can't go home again, but they lacked vision. And a temporal discombobulator.
So Warcraft Classic was certainly not something we anticipated. We've re-released 2 of the expansions for it. It's a very vibrant community for us, and really a second community for WoW. We started out, it was really pretty difficult because we didn't build WoW with the intent of ever going back and replaying, that experience. So we had literally lost some of the data required to do that. We had to recreate it, if you would. Now it's based on our modern, client and server, but we wanted it to be a truly authentic experience. And maybe we were a little too overzealous in that. We wanted to reassure players that we weren't going to have any changes whatsoever. So we developed this hashtag, no changes. And then over the course of time, players like, this community is a lot of fun, but there's a few things that you did that we'd like for you to go ahead and put back in. And so now we have hashtag some changes, but they're informed by our community. I think one of the funniest things is that, we went back and we took a lot of effort to fix bugs, things that were broken in the old WoW. And we had players tell us, no, don't fix that bug. That's a pretty cool exploit, So we'd go back in and reintroduce the bug. But it was a really cool experience for us. It's really awesome for us to be able to have 2 communities in WoW, one reliving the past, so to speak, and for some people, it's their first experience. They chose to go into WoW Classic as the first WoW that they've ever played. So we talked a lot about WoW. So what are some of the other expressions that we've had of Warcraft? Our love for RTSs and then our love for MMOs. One of the things that we loved playing at Blizzard was TCGs, or trading card games. Magic the Gathering was super popular. We actually did our own Magic the Gathering type game, trading card game, in the form of a World of Warcraft trading game. And so that led to the creation of Hearthstone. This was Project Pegasus internally. And the challenge for us is how do we make this physical game, because up until that point there really wasn't a digital TCG, how do we turn that into a really cool digital game? How can we take advantage of that technology and do something that would be hard to do in a paper game? We actually took inspiration from Warcraft. So the foundation for it was to look at the various classes of WoW and create the card families for Hearthstone. And it turned out to be, it worked out really well. It also created a great connection. If you'd never played WoW, if you understood the card families in Hearthstone, you could make that transition to WoW and kind of get, I know what a hunter is all about. They're going to summon a bunch of beasts, or at least they're going to have a beast. Or warriors are, got a lot of armor on them and they can do a lot of damage, but they also have to take a lot of damage. And that became sort of the foundation of how we designed Hearthstone. Some of the ways in which we, things that we did inside of Hearthstone that you really couldn't do practically on a regular card game is we actually have some cards that allow you to make duplicates of whatever's in your opponent's deck. You can imagine how messy that would be if you were trying to do that, at a card tournament. But Hearthstone brought millions of players to play billions of matches. It initially released on PC, and then we moved it to tablet, and then on into mobile. Here you can see some of the extensions we've made to Hearthstone. Over its 10-year history, we've actually done 26 different expansions for it, 5 different adventures on top of the original card set. We've had over 150 million people play Hearthstone in 158 billion games. And Hearthstone, just last week, celebrated its 10th birthday. So, happy birthday, Hearthstone. So, we were intrigued by mobile as a platform. I mean, a lot of us were playing mobile games. And we thought, now what if we, and we were certainly, emboldened by the success of Hearthstone on mobile. So like, how would we envision a game built from the ground up for mobile? So we went back to our strategy roots, and we made Warcraft Rumble. Rumble was actually game directed and led by folks from the WoW team. So while it has strategy roots in it, you'll see a lot of elements of WoW in Rumble. Rumble is, if you haven't played it, I encourage you to do it, but you're essentially, you're picking leaders, you're building troop armies, you go on these maps and essentially try to take down your opponent's home tower, so to speak. And the families themselves, the key story characters, are based on the characters that you see in World of Warcraft. The maps, and it's interesting the transition we made. In original Warcraft RTS, the maps became the zones of WoW. Well, now the zones of WoW become the maps of Rumble. But Rumble was we just released it in November. It was a really cool exploration for us to get into mobiles, and it's actually taught us some things that we brought back to how we regard the support of our games, both WoW and Hearthstone. And like Hearthstone, has that element of whimsy and humor in it. So now I want to tell you a little bit about the philosophies and decisions that we made that we think contributed to our success. The 5 areas I want to cover are setting, visual style, story, our evolving gameplay, and then our community. So the setting turned out to be a really important choice for us because that classic fantasy setting is very familiar to people. It also gives you a technology that is reasonably easy to understand. Everybody knows, or hopefully everybody knows, how to wield a sword and a shield or a bow. And as opposed to science fiction, which sometimes has to explain what it's all about, how do you use the weaponry that's in it. It's also, medieval fantasy's been expressed over many, many decades in literature, in film, and so people understood that, they could get into it, super accessible. And it has global appeal. I mentioned earlier, but while we base a lot of it on Western mythology, we put a lot of Eastern influences in our particular brand of fantasy. And the visual style, we could have gone, strictly photorealistic. 3D cards when Warcraft first came out, were just becoming the rage, but they were improving literally every 6 months. How many of you went out and spent a lot of money, bought your first 3D card? I got my NVIDIA Riva, only to find it obsoleted within a year. It's like, oh man. Well, the same thing was happening with the visuals that people were creating for those games. And when you approach photoreal, especially over a course of a lengthy lifespan that Warcraft has had, you quickly get kind of outmoded. Your graphics look dated, and we wanted to make sure that they didn't look dated, that they would be timeless for us. So that turned out to be a really good choice for us. We also could have gone cartoony, but we wanted to appeal to a little bit older audience. We didn't want it to be seen as a kid's game, very much a social game. It is a family game, it's certainly in World of Warcraft, but by and large, we wanted to make sure that people still saw it as somewhat serious, and so we went for this stylized look. Bulky shoulders, and which looks great when you're putting armor on it, right? A lot of, in the animation of our characters, squash and stretch, so it had a lot of personality. And this actually kind of became the Blizzard look. And you can, one of our goals is that when you see somebody playing one of our games, that people look over and say, hey, is that Rumble? Is that WoW? Is that Hearthstone? Because it's a very distinctive look for our games. And you can see how we each game kind of interprets or reinterprets the style of a character. In this case, this is Jaina Proudmoore. That's how she appeared in the original Warcraft 3. And over the course of our games, how she's expressed. So she looks different, but you can still see the key things that make her Jaina. And then story. RTS games didn't necessarily have to have a story, but it was a way to propel people through the missions. And by creating a story, we laid the foundation for an intellectual property, a franchise. It was those things that helped connect people across games. It was part of what connected them to the worlds themselves. And when you think about it, especially a game like World of Warcraft, people aren't ingesting the story in the same way as they would a movie. It's not a linear experience where it's like, okay, 2 hours, I'm in, I know what's going on with every one of these characters, and you're following the plot to the end. You may be interrupted by hours, weeks, months in your play experience. So how do we keep that thread together? And having those key story characters sort of propel it. So they always had some big conflict that they're dealing with, sometimes an existential threat to our planet, Azeroth, or maybe just they have a real beef with each other. And you're the heroes in there assisting these leaders, but you understand both the conflict and the world around you. And you see here Arthas, he was in the Frozen Throne in Warcraft the RTS. He certainly was the center of the Lich King, Wrath of the Lich King, which is what our classic players are playing right now. That was, I think, one of our more poignant stories about how power corrupts. So evolving gameplay. What we've done through the course of time is to either take existing genres or even games that we've had ourselves and iterate on those, but always find a way to reduce the complexity in playing those games, make them more accessible, and experiment with new modes of play. And we like to iterate on that proven gameplay. And then finally, and this has really been the most important thing for us, is community. We behave as the caretakers of, some people told me, you own my childhood, but we're the caretakers of their community, of their lifestyle. And we take that seriously. And what has helped us is through the course of taking care of that community, we've grown through a network effect. People invite their friends to be part of the game. People incorporate that in their lifestyle. That becomes something that they get together, they do on a Tuesday night, and there's a little bit of almost pressure from your friends, like, oh, we're going to go do this thing together. But then you also know you have a place to go, and you have a way to connect with people. You can make friends, across borders, across cultural, differences, and that's a really important aspect of our game, and especially WoW. And then we've tried to keep the games fresh through regular content updates. So this just kind of sums up the things that we attribute to the success of our franchise. So now I want to talk a little bit about a more recent case study on how things maybe didn't work out for us. So if you look at, this is the subscriber curve for World of Warcraft. And we have a really predictable pattern where every time an expansion would come out, a lot of people would come in to play that expansion. They'd reunite with their friends, they'd level up, they'd get through a lot of the content, they might down a raid boss, and a substantial group of them would continue on, all the way through the expansion and on to the next one. And this isn't a steady state, right? We have a constant inflow and outflow. We literally have almost as many new players coming in as other players going out. The churn, so to speak. But they always would come back. Every expansion we released, for pretty much, it was very predictable. The same number of folks would come back. And then when we released Classic, you can see we actually, in between expansion releases, had another big peak. So we brought back, we created a new community of players. And if you notice that actually led to, when we saw that tapering off after the release, we're now at a higher level. So when Shadowlands came out, we had a very high and healthy, subscriber base for the game. So as we're heading into, all right, we're going to do the next 2 expansions for Classic, and we're going to release Dragonflight. So this is what we expected to see as a result of that. Now we recognize that, okay, Shadowlands came out during COVID, and so that might have been a little bit higher, but we expected Dragonflight, especially with the, remember this is the overall subscriber base, we expected that to still be a really strong, healthy showing. That's what we got. And I put Professor Putricide in there if you played. He rarely means good news, even though he talks about good news a lot. And this was not good news for us. Instead of seeing that big healthy peak at Dragonflight, it was much lower. And a lot of that was attributed to people losing their interest and even in some cases their trust in us during Shadowlands. So what went wrong? I mean, we did surveys of our players. We looked at forums. We had a community council. We consulted with them. We consulted ourselves. A lot of us are players. And we just got real about it. And ironic that some of the things that went wrong for us are some of the things that we felt led to our success. That we might have, strayed from the things that we believe so strongly. So first off was the story and setting. In Shadowlands, you're essentially going to a place that was never expressed in the RTS, but it's this afterlife. And players felt like they were a stranger in a strange land. We had similar concepts with Burning Crusade and Legion, but this felt pretty alien to our players. And Azeroth, which is the place that they'd leveled up and they'd spent a lot of time in their characters, was their anchor, was not a place that they were visiting anymore. They're literally playing in the afterlife. Also, the main antagonist, the jailer, was not a character that we evolved very well in the course of that expansion. Wasn't understood to our players. We hadn't really introduced him before. He also had this kind of annoying habit of taking credit for all the things that had ever happened in WoW. And it felt a little bit too contrived. And then lastly, we diminished some of the key story characters. Characters that our players had grown to love or hate, but nonetheless expected to see have a powerful presence. We kind of diminished them in Shadowlands. And so from a story standpoint, players were disappointed. And from a franchise standpoint, it was tough to see some of those important characters reduced. Next was the gameplay itself. We had been clinging to the idea that, hey, the way we have done expansions in the past is the way we should do it for Shadowlands. And one of the things we introduced all the way back in Legion was this notion of borrowed power. That is that you get items, in the case of Legion, it was an artifact weapon, that you're leveling up and that you're accumulating points, but the power is in the item and not in your character, the thing that you've invested time in. And players didn't like it. And they were telling us that in subtle ways from Legion and then on into Battle for Azeroth, but it really came to a head with Shadowlands. They had simply had enough with that. Things changed. Players changed. During this time, we're bringing a lot of new players, but I think that time is really important to people. And we couldn't count on them spending as much time grinding their way through something as they had in the past. And so we were competing with a lot of other entertainment experiences. So how do we change, what we're doing? The last part, too, is with our community. We had, again, as I mentioned, we released Shadowlands in COVID. It was pretty tough for us. Everyone had to go home and work from home. We'd never done that before. And we put all of our resources on getting Shadowlands out. It was important for us to be able to do that for our players. We made that paramount. But as a result, we hadn't really adequately, resourced the first update for Shadowlands. So there was kind of a lengthy gap between the release of Shadowlands and the first update. And players are like, hey, I'm kind of bored. I want something to do. What's going on, Blizzard? Did you run out of steam? And we weren't consistent in those updates. And we also weren't communicating with our players. We'd always kind of prided ourselves in we're going to do something amazing and then, surprise you with it and hopefully you're going to love it. But our players needed to know, well, no, I want to know. I'm invested time here. I want to still hang out with my friends who want cool things to do. What are you up to, And are you even listening to us anymore? And here's some of the comments that you can see. A couple of comments complaining about borrowed power, complaining about the respect for players' time. And that quote was so important to us. That's become a mantra for us. Respect your players' time. So what do we do? Now we were already, as we were, after we finished off the initial release of Shadowlands, and we're talking about where do we go next, we realized that, maybe this was going to be a little bit too far out for our players, and that we wanted to return to high fantasy. So that was already in the works. We wanted to go to the Dragon Isles. We wanted to tell that story. It's an important aspect of, the history of Azeroth. And so that was already in the works to do Dragonflight. But Dragonflight turned out to be exactly what players wanted in terms of setting. High fantasy, get to be on dragons. Deeper storytelling, for our players. We worked in, those key story characters, and we told you a lot of the threads that we had either kept a little mysterious or we hadn't connected before. And we reintroduced dangerous, but humor. It was more lighthearted. It wasn't as somber as, the afterlife that we saw in Shadowlands. And the zones themselves were vibrant, bright light and, really majestic and beautiful things. This is actually a shot from a quest in the game where all you do is stay a while and listen. You sit down on this ledge and you look at the dragons flying around and you have a little, dialogue with the character. And then gameplay. We got rid of borrowed power. Yay, our players were pretty happy about that. And our design decisions became player-centric as opposed to being more about the game that we wanted to build. I mean, originally it was like, we build games that we love, which is a great way to start, and all of you should be considering that. If you don't like it, then you certainly shouldn't be making it. But think beyond that. Think about what your players want. And the longer you run, the more you know what they want. I mean, we have all kinds of data in our players in terms of where they're playing, how they're spending their time, and looking at that, reviewing it, talking to them, and using that to inform your design decisions. And I specifically say data informed. We didn't go so far as to, we're going to look at all the data and that's the game that we're going to do. We're going to check all the boxes, but rather, hey, here's some stuff we want to do. Here's a whole list of things that we want to do. What are the things that we think our players are going to like the most based on what they're telling us? And we prioritize those things. And that made a pretty big difference for us. We also, for those of you who play WoW, at the very beginning, it was two factions. It was Horde versus Alliance, right? And that's an important part of the story. But people, when they first came into the game, they would often choose one faction over the other on the basis of how they looked. I want to be an orc. I mean, this is cool. They ride motorcycles and they're spiky. Or you want to be part of the Alliance because actually they look very pretty and they look awesome in shining armor and their buildings are so cool. They're like those fairy tale castles. But that decision up front could actually trap you because you meet somebody in real life, you're hanging out at GDC, it's like, oh, you play WoW, that's awesome. What do you play? I play Alliance. Oh, I play Horde. Yeah, well, I guess we can't be friends. And it's like, well, why should we create that division? So we broke the cardinal rule, and we allow cross-faction play. Let's see. Oh, and I can't forget, portrayed here, dragon riding. So flying is something that our players have loved to do, and we release an expansion, and within minutes, it's like, when are we going to get flying? We're like, you don't get flying because we want you to walk around on the ground and really get immersed in the story. And it's a good reason, right? Experience it more. But it's like, yeah, but I really want flying. When are you going to have flying? So with Dragon Riding, we're like, you know what? It's an expansion about dragons. It'd be kind of weird if we don't let people fly. So we built a whole new flying system, Dragon Riding, that allows you from the very beginning to, you get your dragon and you get to, fly around the entire Dragon Isles. And we designed all the zones so that they could be taken in from the air and that, and we made a joy of flying. I don't know if you've tried it, hopefully you agree that the aerobatics and the control that you have over your flying mounts is like nothing we've done before. It's literally like a flight simulator in a good way, not a bad way. No controls for your dragon. So the other thing we did is we committed. We'd never done this before, but excuse me. We laid out the full year of what we were going to do. We told our players, hey, this is what you can count on from us. And we delivered on it. And the way we did that is we put aside dedicated resources, people, to just make content for these patch updates. Now, some of these things were part of what we call the expansion team, especially the blue banners there. But a lot of the white banner stuff was that live service team. And it's funny because, we've been operating, live service since the beginning. But it's actually kind of the experience that we had with mobile. We're like, oh, these people are looking at data all the time. They're constantly worried about what their players are doing. They're using this to plan their updates. Maybe there's some good learnings for us there. And it turned out to be the case. Some of the same disciplines that your mobile colleagues are going through, your product managers are going through, we kind of had to relearn for the WoW team. And we continued that for Classic as well. And we actually got creative with Classic. We have a lot of people on the team that they're part of the Classic community themselves. They love it. We asked them, okay, so we want to be careful. Classic is about no changes, but what are some clever things that we could do to engage this Classic community? And so we did hardcore mode, which was crazy, for us. It turned out to be a lot of fun for content creators, because they could show people trying to level up as far as they could before getting killed off. But it wasn't hardcore for us. Wasn't always just competitive either. We'd see groups band together and try and survive as long as they could. But it was a lot of fun. And then Season of Discovery was a new way to let players re-experience Classic, but with a twist. They could actually. We made some modifications that our players could make modifications to their class and discover, if you would, those powers. And then finally, on Warcraft itself, Modern WoW itself, we've extended this commitment to our players. We are releasing content every 8 weeks in the game. And if you'll notice there, if those of you may have been traveling yesterday, but there's a little pirate flag. Well, yesterday, we announced Plunderstorm, which is actually a mode for Warcraft, World of Warcraft. It isn't inside of WoW Modern, and it isn't inside of WoW Classic. What it is it's a battle royale version of the game that you can just jump into with you don't take your existing character from either of those games. You roll a new character. If you've played battle royale games, you kind of know how that functions. But when you're killing off your opponents, they as they die, they put out a piñata of the loot in the form of the spells that they were using. So you pick and choose which of their spells you want, and then you carry on. And it's we did it kind of for fun. We just thought this would be a cool mode to put in. We wanted to see if players would like it. The response has been really good for us. I think people are having a lot of fun. They were totally unexpected. I think what was really interesting for me, I was reading some of the comments yesterday, is that there were, it might surprise you, but there are actually people that will get on the internet and complain about your game, and yeah, I know, weird, right? At least it was back in the 90s. Certainly not today. It's pretty commonplace. But there were some people like, man, I wish they, why did they make this, battle royale thing, blah blah blah. And we knew we'd done the right thing when our own players were coming forward and saying, why are you complaining? They give you something essentially that you didn't know was coming. It's a pleasant surprise. It seems to be a hell of a lot of fun. I don't understand why you're complaining. You people just complain. And I was watching the comments from the players towards the players, and I'm like, okay, we did something right. And we want to continue to do kind of creative stuff. Keep it stirred up. Just really don't get stuck in the rut that we had been in, where we were kind of repeating the same pattern. And then finally, we announced the next 3 expansions at BlizzCon. We've never done that. We committed to what's the story going to be set in, what are the major plot points, or at least the major plot point for each one of these, and we're committed to delivering on that. So summing up the things that we feel we did right, to turn around, what was happening on World of Warcraft in story and setting, gameplay, and community. And these are some of the comments as a result of it. They're ecstatic that we got rid of borrowed power. They're happy with Dragonflight. They like the story. They love the pace of content updates. And that's the stuff you like to see, right? So, what was the result? We actually, for the first time in the history of World of Warcraft, we have more subscribers before the next expansion comes out than in any other time in the life of an expansion, right? So normally we would see a drop-off that would continue, and then it pops up when the next expansion comes out. You see that nice big, increase, which was really, that trajectory happened just as our live services was kicking in, as we were making commitments. And so we're feeling pretty good about, where we are now, and crises averted. But we have to stay vigilant, right? We have to stay on top of our community. We have to continue to deliver things that excite them. So, I think I've covered some of this, but I want to make sure. So, biggest lessons for us that I wanted to impart to you is that players want evolution. These communities are deeply invested in the games, and they don't want to leave your game. Don't give them a reason to leave. Give them a reason to stay. And community sentiment during Shadowlands was a real wake-up call for us. What our players wanted had fundamentally changed, and we hadn't recognized that. So we had to throw out our old playbook that had worked for us for, 18 years at that point. And now we're crafting a new playbook, but our players are co-authoring it with us. I think I pretty much covered it. So our motto on top of our mission statement, which was original and is true today, is to honor the past and forge the future. So with that, I want to thank you. And I think we have, Drew, do we have just a couple minutes? Yeah. Okay, if anybody wants to ask a question, head up to the mic if you want. It's right behind you there, if you don't mind.
Hey there. Hi.
I'll do my best.
On this side, hi.
Hi.
Hi. How you doing, John?
Good.
Ben Fox. I was at Blizzard for a little while, running some data applications, and I'm curious. I saw some of the data information that you provided on, how well the game has done over the years. Where do you see that kind of taking you in the future, and how big of a part will data play in how you evolve the game and continue to move forward?
Data has a significant part of the game right now. We have a very close relationship between our product management team and our dev team. As I said, we have a dedicated live services team. We actually have an associate game director, Jeremy Fiesel. That is his life. And if any of you knew the history of Fiesel, in Mists of Pandaria, we need a little more time, and we're like, hey, Fiesel, go create something for us to keep the players busy. And he went crazy and created the Timeless Isle. So it's in his DNA. I think he's the right person to lead it. But they work closely with our PM group, and we literally do weekly review of what are the things we'd like to do, what are the things our players would like us to do, and we use a kind of a methodology to stack rank, both the how big an effort is it to do that, and how much excitement do we think our engagement is, like how we want to measure things, we'll get from our players. We also have put a lot of effort into variety of activities and not over-index on, hey, it's just for the raiders or the Battlegrounds folks, but even for the folks that are there to just kind of role play and go out and be in the world together, we want to make sure we're giving them new content. Yep. Anybody else? Yeah.
Hi. I just have a question. Thank you for the talk, was great, but how do you engage new players that are coming to WoW for the first time? They can feel left out with so many expansions, so many stuff to do. They can feel left out because they're just coming into the game after 20 years. How do you cater to those gamers?
Yeah, good question. And this is an area that we have to continue to evolve. But what we introduced is when you first come in, if you start from the very beginning, You go to a special place called Exile's Reach. Don't be thwarted by that terrible name. But you actually are there with other new players, and you level to 10, essentially. And you get to know the ropes of how to play the game. And we kind of walk you through all the mechanics of it. And from that point, you will, once the next expansion is out, you'll go into Dragonflight, and you'll level up to maximum there. And hopefully, we try to keep that group of people together, so we'll even suggest a realm that you can go to that group will be in. But a lot of people don't enter that way. And most people are, or not most people, but a lot of people, their friends will say, hey, come and play WoW with me. And so we offer a boost to them. And in that case, they go right into max level, and they can play right along with their friends. But as you pointed out, WoW's got a lot of complexity and depth to it. And so we encourage friends to play together and kind of, show them the cool stuff to do. And, here's the do's and don'ts of how to down this boss. But I think that's an area for us to grow as well. I mean, I think watching how new players are coming in, what's exciting for them, what isn't, how much time commitment, do they feel comfortable with. And I think that's an area you'll see us, fine tune quite a bit over the next few years.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, so when we will have a universe that is 30 years old, there is a difficulty when it comes to keeping consistent and delivering on the continuity of story, especially when you have other mediums like books, comics, etc. Are there any lessons or any interesting challenges that you've had to overcome to get to the point that you are today?
Yeah, I mean, most of so the question was related to creating cohesion and consistency across our stories in various forms of media. So one of the things we do is that we review all of it. So read the books, read the comic books, look at the board games, reviewed the movie, and that's honestly a big part of Chris Metzen's job now. He's returned to work with us because it's so important, right? You want characters to be true to their nature, and their motivations. And we'll continue to explore, other forms of media because, that's a great way for people to get to know the universe. We're excited about it. We think, there's a lot of great parables and lessons in WoW and the way the denizens of Azeroth, behave and treat each other. But we do monitor all that. We don't just throw it out there and let, anybody do what they want with the universe. But, that being said, as you point out, it's 30 years. Time to time, we even have our own inconsistencies. We've established databases to be able to go back and track, okay, what exactly did Khadgar say? And, what was Medivh's thing? So, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Yeah. Yeah, I'll probably have to end it because I think Drew wants to drag me up. Let me take your question and then, okay, go ahead.
First of all, thank you for the presentation and these amazing games. I'm a big fan. I just wanted to ask maybe what was the role of intellectual property in building your franchise? Maybe you can share some priorities or challenges in these terms.
Yeah, it's funny. We didn't set out to build a universe that would last 30 years, but that's why I wanted to show some of the decisions we made along the way that worked out really well towards it. A couple of years ago, we reorganized, and that's how I became general manager. And that's a big part of my job is to, safeguard Warcraft, as an intellectual property. But I'm a developer, and so I think of that through the games that we make. And so we will always be central in games. If you look at something like Marvel, they were always central in comic books. New characters were created there. Story was created there, and the movies and the games were an offshoot of that. And I think for us, it's the games. We'll express the story first through the games, and then we'll look for cool and new things to do and find different ways for you to experience Warcraft in other media. But games will be the center for that.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you so much.